We are in record. You are good to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah.
So, um, Kathy Martin grew up downstream on the gunpowder. Been out in nature, in the water, and immersed in all those types of things all my life. I actually went to high school with Charlie Davis, one of your founders. So that can tell you how old I am, because he and I are the same age. Was on the Baltimore County CEQ, the Commission on Environmental Quality, with his wife Linda Davis, who you probably all know as well. I've been going on a number of the field trips the last couple of years with the Natural History Society, and then recently, in the last maybe 2 years or so, I guess it was in the middle of COVID. I remember joining the Herp Club, and because I think the first thing that really piqued my attention was you did a session on vernal ponds and how important they were. And I was looking for information, quote, how to maintain them, and found out that what I've done is basically ignored mine, which sounded like the best advice, because you don't go in there and put fish in, you don't go in there and do goofy stuff to it. So let the frogs be frogs and the salamanders be salamanders. So my other hat, one of my many, is I'm a long-term board member of NeighborSpace. And I'm going to next hand it over to Phyllis Joris, our executive director, who leads us in our stewardship and additional acquisition, but our current stewardship of 100 acres within Baltimore County, inside the URDL line, the Urban Rural Demarcation Line, on 21 sites. And Phyllis will go a little bit further into those details. But thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and we'll be ready for questions at the end, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm, like Kathy said, I'm Phyllis Joris. I'm the executive director of NeighborSpace. Let me, before I get into this, Matthew, how much time, just so I don't take too much, how much time do you have?
So our meetings generally run for an hour, and you are the only item on the agenda. The thing about Zoom is that if people need to go, they can just leave, right? It's not like they're getting up and walking out of the room on you or anything. So, yeah, I think we have plenty of time.
Okay, then let me pull this up. I have a presentation that just kind of gives an overview of what NeighborSpace does. And then I can share about this project idea, which I'm very excited about. And I'm also very excited about the long-term partnership. Let's see if I can do this. Is that showing up okay for everyone?
Looks good on this end.
All right. So NeighborSpace is a land trust. I'm sure many of you are familiar with land trusts, but people often aren't. So just to be safe, a land trust is a nonprofit that works to conserve land. And by conserve, we mean that that land is prevented from development forever. So there's two ways we do that. We either put an easement on land, which means that someone else retains ownership, and there's a document that goes over top that says that that land can never be developed, or we acquire properties in fee. We're about half and half. Our properties are split about 50-50 between properties that we own and properties that we have an easement on. So I just have some pictures here from local land trusts. The one in the top right corner is a property conserved by the Hartford Land Trust. This one in the middle is a picture of property owners on a property that they conserve through Gunpowder Valley. And then here is one of Baltimore Green Space's sites. So I just wanted to, this kind of illustrates the wide range of land trusts that exist. This one on the top right is your more typical rural land trust. Their sites are either agricultural land or forested tracts. Gunpowder Valley, mostly agricultural, but also some private that's non-working lands. And then Baltimore Green Space works much more closely the way that we, similarly to our work, they conserve urban vacant lots, usually in Baltimore City. So land trust sites can look very different, and their work can look very different as well. So Kathy already explained that our service area is inside the URDL. URDL stands for Urban Rural Demarcation Line, and it is this black squiggly line on this map here. The blue dots are our sites. So like Kathy said, we have 21 sites. You can tell that there's several in each county council district, all around the Beltway. And the green lines are the council district boundaries. We have about 100 acres in total. And as I said, those are a mix of easements and properties that we own in fee. And of those 21 sites, 8 have been improved with green infrastructure. And then there's several more that we have projects for, slated for. Several are either in a design phase or will be constructed soon. Organizationally, this slide is a little bit outdated. We now have 11 board members and 3 part-time staff. I'm technically full-time at this point, and then I have a community engagement and volunteer coordinator and an administrative manager. So this URDL, this Urban Rural Demarcation Line, as it states, was drawn in the 60s to separate the urban part of Baltimore County that's inside the line with the rural part of Baltimore County outside. That was done for 2 reasons. One, to contain development and concentrate it in that urban area, and 2, to protect the resources in the rural area. So protect water and our water and food. All the water reservoirs are out in the rural area, and that's where our farmers are located too. So I think I already mentioned this. So inside this line, this hatched area, that's our service area. So in between the city line, we do not conserve in the city. So in between the city line and this URDL, and that's where your older, more densely populated suburbs are. So we go all the way from Dundalk down in the southeast, through Middle River, Overly, Parkville, Towson, over to Catonsville, Arbutus, Halethorpe, all the way around that beltway. I think it's a little.
What sites do you have in Overly, Phyllis? That's where the Natural History Society is. So
right, yeah. So actually, right down the street from you all, there's it's a very small site on the corner of Beach and Elm. If I'm correct, it's on Beach, and I think it's Elm that dead ends into it. So it's a really small natural site. It was cleaned up a few years ago, and we added some native plantings. And there's some of the trees that were taken down. We left the logs. There's 2 benches there, and kind of a natural playground for kids. There's a really big log that I think you can crawl through. If everything's slowly decomposing, but it's a cute little spot, nice and shaded. We did do a presentation recently because we partnered with Towson University students to unearth some of the history of that site, because the line between one of Baltimore County's first African-American neighborhoods and the white neighborhood on the other side, that line runs diagonally through that site. So that's actually one of the sites that's right now under design. We're trying to come up with a way to highlight that history.
That might be something the Archaeology Club would be interested in as well.
We may have just lost Phyllis.
Yeah, it looks like she froze up.
Okay.
Because our service area is by definition slated for development, right? That's where all the development is supposed to take place to protect everything outside that line. And here we are trying to conserve land inside that line. You could also, I sometimes get this question, why? There's plenty of parks. And these are all pictures from Baltimore County parks. I think this might be North Point. I think this is closest to you. Oh, what's it called now? Double Rock, right? I'm blanking on the name. This is the reservoir, like Raven Reservoir.
I think it's Double Rock.
Is it Double Rock, Matthew?
I
Yeah,
believe
okay,
so.
Double Rock. And then this one up top, I'm not sure. But so, plenty of parkland. There are plenty of parks in the county. But we have a mapping tool that we use to make this map. A lot of those parks are not within, you have to take a car to get to these parks often. And then there are also plenty of neighborhoods that do not actually have green space, or at least not within walking distance. So this is a heat map that shows the deficit of open space. The blue, as you can see below in the legend, so the blue is good access, plenty of green. The yellow is our neighborhoods where there is no public green space within walking distance. I will say walking distance here is a 1/4 mile. I actually tend to go with 1/2 mile, which is sort of the gold standard, which equates to a 10-minute walk. And studies have shown that that's the limit at which people, once you go more than 1/2 mile, people tend to take their car, apparently. That's what studies show. So these yellow, orange, and purple these yellow and orange areas are all areas where there's a lack of open space. So what we do, we try to fill that gap between those bigger county parks and people's backyards. So these smaller community open spaces that really are for those neighbors to walk to, gather, be in nature, play. There's other reasons. So aside from the fact that there's a lot of neighborhoods that don't have open space within walking distance, there are also a lot of neighborhoods that just aren't walkable, period. So the yellow and orange here are neighborhoods where that are either car dependent or somewhat car dependent. And as you can tell, most of the neighborhoods around the Beltway fall in that category. We also have every watershed inside the URDL is impaired either for nutrient or sediment or both. So that's another issue that adding green space or conserving what we have can prevent it from getting worse. And then there's also a lot of communities inside our service area that suffer from environmental justice issues. So this is a report that Baltimore County commissioned. It's a little bit old at this point, I believe. I can't see actually the top of my screen, but I think it's 10 years old at this point. And so the yellow and red areas are areas that are at risk, either medium or high risk for environmental justice conditions related to water quality. Since then, the EPA has published a new tool, and then the Maryland Department of the Environment has published its own statewide tool to measure environmental justice issues. So there's a better tool available now, and that also takes into account heat islands, for instance, air pollution. But this is, as you can tell on this map, our service area is largely yellow. And then low home values studies have shown that public open space can boost home values, and Baltimore County, or at least the urban part of Baltimore County, has relatively low home values compared to other surrounding counties. So all of this combined is why our mission is a little bit broader than that of a typical or more traditional land trust. So we work to enhance the livability of communities in that service area, in those older urban neighborhoods, by protecting and improving land for small parks, gardens, trails, and natural areas. I add to that usually protecting, improving, and stewarding land. As I said earlier, when a land trust conserves land, that's for forever, in perpetuity. So we also spend a lot of time and energy stewarding the lands that we already have protected and improved. This picture is of one of our parks in Towson, Ridgely Manor Park. We have 2 large meadows there. This is an older picture. The poppies have since disappeared, and there's a lot more goldenrod now, boneset grasses, but it's really, really pretty in the summer and late spring when everything's in bloom. Livability is a word that covers a lot of different factors that add up to a community's quality of life. So we look at environmental, which is pretty standard for a land trust. So air and water quality, access to open space, connectivity. So that means green spaces that connect to each other. Wildlife habitat is another environmental indicator that we take into account, but we also take into account social and economic factors. So social, health and well-being, physical and mental, community pride, cohesion, and the access to recreation. Economic, we look at property values, environmental services, infrastructure, and safety is another factor that adds up to ways that is sums up to livability. So all those factors together, you really need good social, economic, and environmental qualities to have a livable community. And so a lot of our urban communities are lacking in one or more of those aspects. So how do we do this? How do we improve livability? As I said earlier, we conserve, but we also restore and steward those spaces, and we do that through a community-driven process. So in order to really meet the needs of that community, those vary from community to community, the environmental, social, and economic needs. We work together with the community to restore that space. I think the easiest way to share how we go about that is to look at an example. So this is Chestnut Park in Dundalk. This is a really nice drone picture, courtesy of the Nature Conservancy. But so here you can see the park. The NeighborSpace property is this entire triangle. So it runs all the way to the left to the point of that triangle right ahead of that bus. As is often the case with these projects, grants cover part of what we want to do. And so here the grant literally covered this part of the design that you can see has the path on it and did not cover the community raised bed garden that is to come in the corner here. So we actually have an Eagle Scout who's working right now. Actually, for those of you who know Bronwyn's oldest son is constructing our raised beds here for the Girl Scout troop and the neighbors to raise flowers and grow flowers and vegetables. So that's really exciting. But so this is what the park looked like in the fall of last year. There's a path winding through. We planted trees. What you can't see underneath because this is a summer photo, underneath the canopy are gardens. So Turner Station is a good example of a community, a Baltimore County community inside the URDL that suffers from a number of environmental justice issues. So if you're not familiar with where Turner Station is located, let me go back. It's right here. Next to Sparrows Point, right next to the old Beth Steel site. So it has 695 going over top. It has heavy industry on this side. This is Bear Creek here on the left, which is heavily polluted. It's now a Superfunds cleanup site, so hopefully that will help improve the water quality there. Yeah, so this is just and then there's Gray's landfill, which you can't see on the picture, but Gray's landfill is across the water. So there's a lot of pollution going on. On top of that, obviously from the picture, it's low lying. So now with the effects of climate change, the community has always flooded, but now with the effects of climate change, that flooding is getting worse. And this is also a community that suffers from a lack of open space. It's a picture of Beth Steel. So in the 70s, Turner Station was a thriving neighborhood. There's older residents claim that $1 would turn over seven times before leaving the community. It was entirely self-sufficient. Grocery stores, movie theaters, bars, clubs, hairdressers. And then after World War II, when the industry declined, population did as well. So there's quite a bit of vacant housing now, poverty, unemployment, but still a really tight-knit community. A lot of the residents here have lived there since birth, multiple generations, and they all know each other. And they do I think Kathy will second me on this, they throw a good party. This is a Juneteenth celebration from a few years back. So the way that our properties so far have come to us in the last 20 years since we were founded is through a request from a resident. So it's a neighbor who reaches out to us. Often it's a site that's up for sale, a property that's up for sale, and that will trigger neighbors to say, oh, hey, we don't want that to be sold or developed, or we would like to have that space for a park. So that was the case with this one. This had been up for sale for a long time. They weren't able to sell it. And so a neighbor came to us and asked if we could turn that into a community park that is also the gateway to the community, because the only way really to get into Turner Station is to either come down Dundalk, or there's a traffic circle at the end here to get into the neighborhood. So it serves as a nice welcome to people visiting Turner Station. So when we get a community request, there's two things that we do simultaneously. I didn't list the other one on here, but we visit the site to actually lay eyes on the site and walk around, see what the state, sometimes a forested site, which looks really great from up high, is actually in really bad shape. Vice versa, it could look like just, piece of lawn, not much going on, but when you walk around, you can see its potential better. So we'll always visit the site. And then we also do a GIS analysis. So GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, and it's a mapping. Let me go all the way back. that heat map. So this is what it looks like when you use a GIS tool to assess a piece of a certain area. So this is what this is done using our GIS tool. We had one custom made for NeighborSpace that measures those different, sorry for skipping through here, but measures some of these different indicators, the environmental, social, and economic objectives that we're trying to attain. So we use that, and it can actually tell us for a specific site what that site's potential is to address those social, economic, and environmental needs. So depending on how well that site scores and what we see on the site visit, we will then either move forward and say, yes, let's see if we can conserve this property for the community, or we'll say, sorry, but doesn't fit into our portfolio, and try to refer them to other resources. So as I said, this GIS tool is based on those conservation goals that fall in those 3 categories: social, environmental, and economic. And there's different indicators, there's different metrics that we measure for each of those. I already went over those earlier, but this is what it looks like for this specific property. So I know this is really small, but up here on the left, the blue, purple, that's what the social goal looks like. You'll see that the parks itself is not colored. So the darker the color, the higher the property scores. So here the dark blue means that these properties have a really good chance at addressing local social needs. So multifamily housing will boost that score for the simple reason that a lot of people living in the area of that park means that it has the potential to benefit a lot of people. And there's some other indicators there as well. Vulnerable populations, for instance, it looks at income. Whether or not people speak English in the home is another example. Up on the right here, so our environmental goals are split into 2 different considerations. We look at the site's potential for conservation, so conserving it as is, and a site's potential for restoration, which means the potential for it to be restored to a healthy, valuable environment. So on the top, and the reason that those are split is because they often cancel each other out. So for example, if I'm looking at a forested site, that's a good site for conservation because we want to protect that forest. Potential for restoration isn't that high because there's already a lot of trees. Vice versa, if you're looking at an area that's lawn, potential for restoration there is high because you could add a lot of native plantings, stormwater BMPs, that kind of thing. And it's not great for conservation because lawn isn't really a valuable ground cover. So this site scored relatively low for conservation. Again, this was lawn with overgrown with invasives. It did score high for restoration. And then economic goal measures home values, building permits, for instance. Those are indicators that give us an idea of a site's potential to improve the local economic situation. So the site itself doesn't score very high. That's because it's not a residential site, but you can tell by the surrounding, these darker sites, and this one over here, there is a need for to boost those home values. So we did decide to move forward with that site. Another consideration that we look at is community buy-in. So here we have in Turner Station, there's a very active community association, Turner Station conservation teams who were very interested in acquiring and restoring this site. So after the GIS analysis and the site visit, we decided to move forward, and then we do what's called an environmental site assessment. This is kind of a requirement that just safeguards you to make sure that checks whether there's any serious issues on site. So that could be former pollution, any hazards that need to be cleaned up before taking it on. Luckily, this site passed the site assessment. And then what we do is draft a management agreement. It's like a 1 or 2 page contract with our local partner, detailing who is responsible for what. So we do not take on a open space unless there is a community partner identified who is willing to commit to taking care of that space. So in this case, that's Turner Station conservation teams. So we purchased the site. This is generally what these sites look like before we restore them. Lots of invasives. So there's English ivy growing up on these trees. And I think these trees are actually tree of heaven. So there's just a lot of mess. We'll bring in a dumpster, volunteers, and then clean it up as well as we can. These are all neighbors who are still very active with the site. And this is what it looked like after. So now we have something to work with and we can move to restoration. So we've done the cleanup, then we'll move to design. So we want to make sure that this is a space that meets the neighbors' needs. So that depends heavily on what they want to do with the site and what they feel is missing in their community. So to get that information, that input, we use a few different tools, just old-fashioned surveys, both paper. We still get the best response from paper. A lot of the residents here are elderly. Online, and then community meetings. So like Turner Station Conservation Teams holds its own monthly meetings. We'll come, visit those and then hold our own charrettes specifically for design of the park. And this is iterative. So we'll come up with a draft and we'll work together with a landscape architect who either helps us pro bono, or if we have a grant, we can hire a landscape architect to do this for us. We'll draft a concept design, go back to the community, get their feedback, tweak that until we come to a design that everyone is happy with. So this was the design for that park. Again, here, this is flipped from the photo that I showed earlier, but so the community garden, the raised beds are in that corner. There's a trail. The community had a history of playing horseshoe, and that space was used for horseshoe back in the 70s, 80s. So that was put in the design as like a social amenity. And then of course you have your environmental amenities, rain garden, bayscape, pollinator meadows. And so the pink dots here are what I would call those social amenities: a lawn for gathering. We've got the garden for growing food, horseshoe pit, and then a kiosk. In the original design, there was a kiosk for people to gather, play music, have a cookout, that kind of thing. And then we always have the environmental items. So bayscape here, rain garden, a meadow, pollinator garden, to both support local wildlife and deal with issues of either flooding or stormwater runoff, or both, and help improve that water quality. So once we have the design, we can go after funding to construct the design. This depends. There's a number of different grant programs that we've used. This was funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust, so we were able to construct the park. We did hire a contractor. We usually hire a contractor to do that. So that's them at work here. And then we do try to get volunteers involved, even if we don't have a need, just to start getting community buy-in and encourage people to come out and get their hands dirty. So we did some of the planting with neighborhood volunteers. Stewardship. So as I said, we conserve in perpetuity. So stewardship is a big deal for us. Again, that's why we have that management agreement. And that often does rely on a handful of committed neighbors who are willing to sort of check in on the site regularly. We have plenty of neighbors who walk by daily, if not more often, to pick up trash and just check up on the site. This is Valerie Gaines. She's lives right across the alley, and she is amazing. She watered that park every single day throughout that first summer, and into the fall and the second summer again, which at this park we have a really, really high survival rate. You can usually expect to lose around 10%, if not more, of the plantings that you put in. But these were watered so diligently, and she would weed too, that this park is in really good shape. So we do provide a maintenance manual and some training just so that people are familiar with what needs to be done, what season. Identification also, which is tricky because that requires repeated exposure. But we do that when we host events and the training in the beginning. So the idea is that the community would have the skills and knowledge it needs to take care of that space independently, with some support from us. So we do continue to provide support. We co-host stewardship maintenance events with our community partners. And then we, as a land trust, we are required to monitor each of our sites at least once a year. We do that in practice. We do that a lot more often for almost all our sites, because again, we're active in these spaces. together with our community members. So this is what it looks like when it's almost completed. And then we host a festive ribbon cutting to open the park. This was actually really funny because this little Girl Scout here, this was not the plan, but she just got up and grabbed the scissors and cut the ribbon. So she was clearly, maybe she was just impatient because the ceremony took too long, but it's a really cute picture. So we have several sites that have been restored with green and gray infrastructure. This is Powhatan Park in Woodlawn. Ridgely Manor is the one that I took that has the picture of the meadow earlier in the slideshow. This is in Towson. Greystone is also in Woodlawn, not too far from Powhatan. Oh, this is Cherry Heights. This is the one in Overley. So I think Beach runs along here, and I think it's Elm that dead ends into it. Tollgate Wyndham. So Herp Club was at this site on Sunday. It was almost as cold as it was on this picture. Luckily, not as much snow. But that's what it looks like in the winter. And then we have a bunch of other projects that we do. So we do we're working on a trail in Dundalk, a climate change resilience project in Turner Station. We try to offer a lot of events to get people out to our spaces, provide some education, and also just to help with that social cohesion. So this one here, I did not make that slide specifically for tonight, but where it says metrics for site performance, this is where the Herp Club comes in. So what we don't do right now so far is measure how well our sites are actually working on those goals. So in this site, we knew, we need to provide more wild pollinator habitat. There's a flooding issue. There's a lack of open space. How well does that site, after we've restored it, actually do in addressing those goals? I think there's some really simple things we can do to measure that. And one of those is just measuring for the pollinators, for instance, who's out there before and after restoration, and then ongoing from year to year. If we see a drop in certain species or just a drop in total numbers, that should give us pause, and we might need to do extra restoration. On the other hand, I think that if you restore a completely overgrown lot with native plantings, what you would anticipate seeing is a big hike in those numbers. So I think both are valuable to know. And then there's also specific species might inform our restoration choices, which plants we plant, what areas of the site that we focus on. So I'm really interested in kind of getting, and this is what Herp Club already came out and did on Saturday and Sunday. Very excited about. And then farther down the road, I think it would be really interesting to keep tabs on how many of those species we find. So I think, Matthew, this is all, these are some of our volunteers at another park that we have in Woodlawn. The gentleman in the middle is an artist. He made these sculptures that are, and the frog in the back that are sitting out in the park. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you for that overview. So I think Kathy has something to say about the role of the Herp Club in connecting with these goals.
So I think this kind of opens up the question of, like Phyllis said, oops, where's my camera? I guess I'm in the dark because I turned my light off. So my camera is actually on. Anyway, what Phyllis was saying is, we have all these properties. We're looking for some programming, and the programming is something that I think might be what we talk about in the Herp Club, of what kind of things we might want to put together to offer on some of these community sites. The other option is the citizen science. And I think that's actually one of the parts of the grant that we're going after together. But the idea is that we have a lot of places that have natural habitat for herps, and can we get a team to go into a space and start doing some annual monitoring, or that type of thing. So it really is more of a conversation and some feedback on interest and how would we work out next steps for possible programming, and maybe even some particular educational set programming at our sites.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And anybody have any thoughts?
I forgot to elaborate
Say
on
it
the
again, folks.
I forgot to elaborate on the grant, but yes, that kind of sums it up. And again, we can tweak. And I would say, Matthew, even if we don't get that grant, I do have other funding that has popped up that I think we could put towards that as well. But yes, that would be ideal if at some point maybe we can also get some neighbors out to show them what the Herp Club found and educate neighbors on, look, this is who lives here. This is what their needs are. It's
Right.
important to keep the water quality clean and this is why, because they breed and breathe through their skin in this water. So I think just little things like that. There's a lack of knowledge on the one hand, but a lot of curiosity across residents of all ages. And so I do think that would be fun. But I also know that, so I think in that grant, what we decided on was kind of what you're doing already now, going in for a quick survey and then maybe in more detail later, and then possibly later bringing, hosting some kind of educational visit where neighbors are able to come out and join.
And that fits in with, I think, the part of the mission of Natural History Society, which is preserving Maryland's natural treasures. So essentially, I think what you are looking for is um, personnel and expertise in terms of folks to go out to the sites and see what we can find. So these would be sort of small scale mobile pop-up field trips basically. And, we'd have a site and someone decides the weather conditions are appropriate. So we throw something together and try to get some folks to go out there. And like we did over the weekend where we went to Tollgate Wyndham, I believe, and I forgot the name of the one
Sawmill
that
is the
was
other one in Catonsville.
Sawmill in Catonsville, right? And on Saturday in Catonsville, there was nothing much to be found because it was just too cold and rainy. Um, and Sunday, as you said in your picture, it wasn't snowing, but it was still pretty chilly. I found one very, very cold wood frog who did not want to move because he was still emerging from his dormancy. But that's, as the year continues and as seasons change, we can go back to these sites and see how populations develop over time, try to monitor the long-term status and take an inventory and things like that. I think
Yeah, that would
that's
be ideal. That would be perfect.
So we also want to just welcome you to any of our parks, especially through our events, which are posted out on our website. And maybe we can follow up, Matt, with an email linking, advising what the website is. Encourage you all to sign up for our communications for our email newsletter. That way you would get that information about events. If you're interested in participating in any of our stewardship events or any of our fun program events, and you happen to be there and you notice something that's specific about the habitat for herps, or you happen to say, oh, well, let's look here, and you actually find those things and point them out, critters, and point them out, then those are just part of natural education and transferring of knowledge. And as we all know, all you gotta do is show a kid some kind of little critter that's hopping around and how much excitement there is. And there's just, I think, a lot of um, interest for that kind of basic backyard science that I think we can all engage in. And it's right in our neighborhoods. I don't know how close each of you might be to one of our parks, but again, it only takes really 30 minutes to get around our county, even though it looks big. But anyway, that's kind of the plan for an opportunity to partner.
well said. Are there any plans to collect this data and publish it or make it public in some way?
Yes, and so that's kind of my next question. We should figure out what the easiest way, because but I definitely don't want it to be a burden on whoever is so generous as to go out and, tally or look at what they can find. It needs to be easy for them to share that with us. But yes, that is the plan, that we would start keeping, and that's the metric part, start keeping tabs on what is found and how many, depending on how, what exactly, if whether it's a blitz or more of a survey. And then I do hope to publish that and share because I think that's share with both the local community and just in our newsletter. I think that's valuable information.
I'm going to go ahead and open this up to comments from the team that's assembled. What are your thoughts here?
Matthew, there's a comment from Mark Sutherland. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the project to answer
Is the
that.
NHSM Vernal Pool project part of this cooperation with NeighborSpace or a separate effort? I have some announcements related to vernal pools that may be of interest to this audience. So yeah, I think I called it Vernal Pool Project in my headline. And specifically, I think when Kathy and I started having this conversation, the conversation focused around vernal pools. Kathy, can you say anything about that? What's the connection with vernal pools here?
I think because that's where we mostly find amphibians. But no, there is nothing specific about from our perspective. I mean, we have um, uh, different habitats. But no, I'm not aware of anything. I know there are a number of field trips, but I don't know of any particular project that's happening now. In your archives, there was a specific vernal pond um, scientific research project, and I think it was I found it through the Natural History Society, but it could have also been through Frog Watch or some other entity that it was posted. But the Herp Club had been involved in much more heavier science.
We do that
That was like
frequently,
10
yeah.
years ago or more.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what I'm hearing is that NeighborSpace is not specifically focusing on vernal pools, but if we have a group of people that would like to make that their area of focus, I think it would be a way to contribute to the project.
Exactly.
I think I just picked those sites because we thought those would be the site. I don't want to drag out the whole club to come to a site where there's not, likelihood of finding something isn't great. So we picked those sites that we thought had the greatest likelihood of finding amphibians and reptiles. So and we do have to happen to have vernal pools at those 4 or 5 that I shared with you, Matthew.
Good.
But they
Mark,
also,
would you like? Oh,
for
I'm
those
sorry.
have a stream going through them. So
Totally. Mark, do you want to tell us what your
Sure,
vernal
sure.
pool
Yeah, I didn't want
operation
to
is?
hijack the conversation,
No,
but
I
and
appreciate
I am
that. Thank you.
definitely a big proponent of NeighborSpace. I think Phyllis may know Marsha McLaughlin. I don't know if she's on your board.
oh, it still is. Yep.
She's on the board of Patapsco Heritage Greenway. I'm president of the board, so
Oh,
we
okay.
interact in that way. And I think you might have even heard of Oello Garden, one of our candidates for you guys. But anyway, that's all separate. So when I hear the words vernal pool, I jump on and want to spread the word about a few things that I think might be of interest to the Herp Club and anybody else who cares about vernal pools. So quickly, 3 things. One of which, there's a bill in the Maryland General Assembly currently called HB 729, the Vernal Pools Wetlands Protection Act, that I drafted. It's in subcommittee in the House. It was originally to provide full, robust protections for vernal pools in addition to all other wetlands for the state of Maryland. After negotiations with MDE, it's probably going to be just a phase 1 of that effort to get MDE and DNR to define in statute what vernal pools are, in hopes of getting full protections maybe next session. So anybody who's interested in protecting vernal pools, you can look up on the Maryland General Assembly website 729, or just look up vernal pools and you will get it. It's sponsored by Delegate Terry Hill. And so that's a group that I have created called Vernal Pool Partners, for all those people who want to advocate for vernal pools. Happy to have anybody else join me. I guess the first thing for me to do is to put my email in the chat. So you can reach me if you want to. I can give you the details to all of the stuff I just said. But second of all, Patapsco Heritage Greenway, which I just referenced to Phyllis, is a heritage area in Maryland, and we are coordinating vernal pool inventories by citizen science partners. Make sure I spell this right. Along with two other organizations, and maybe the Herp Club or other folks are interested in doing this. So Patapsco Heritage Greenway is basically the Patapsco Valley, and we have programs where we have our volunteers going out looking for vernal pools and recording them according to some standard methods that we have. Anacostia Watershed Society is also doing the same thing with their volunteers, and then Montgomery Parks is using professionals to do the same thing. So we are in the throes now, a year and a half into beginning to gather that data and try and build a grassroots inventory of vernal pools. That was part of the bill at the state level too, which again, it's going to be down the line before we could institute something like that. But that's something where anybody who's interested, contact me. Maybe we can add another partner and begin to build out a general vernal pool inventory across the state. It's basically putting in a GIS point and getting some general physical measurements, obviously any biota that's recorded there, so we can have a better picture of where vernal pools actually are. Anywhere in the area, I mean, it could be anywhere in the state, but right now we're focused, starting with the Patapsco, going down to DC and going up to Baltimore and the county. Baltimore County is actually part of our heritage area as well, so it's quite relevant. Number 3, Choose Clean Water is a conference that's going to happen May 20th to 22nd in Ellicott City. It's an annual conference about people who advocate for clean water, and we're going to have a vernal pool session. Myself and those other 2 organizations I just mentioned. It's going to be at Turf Valley in Ellicott City, and following that session, it'll be like a 90-minute session where we'll talk about vernal pools and educate the general populace, because I think we have a very ripe audience for people who would be interested in that, who are environmentally inclined but may have never heard of vernal pool in their lives. And after that, we'll have a field trip. We're going to go across the road to the David Force Park, which is right next door in Howard County, and go to a vernal pool and talk about it, and also do some water quality monitoring, which we do as part of our PhD program. So those are 3 things. If I have time, I could start sticking some links in the chat for you on those things. But if there's any interest about joining that group that I have vernal pool partners being involved or attending any of those other activities, I just wanted to get it out there to this group.
Thank you, Mark. And if folks are watching this later on YouTube and don't have access to the chat, the email is mark, M-A-R-K, at vernalpoolpartners.org, and you can get all this information. Kathy, I see your hand raised.
Yes, what I wanted to do was follow up on, now, of course, my brain is going to blank out. The topic's been coming in and out. Oh, okay. So there is also through Frog Watch, a way to upload, to register a vernal pond site. You have to be certified to be a frog identification through sound, the audio. But I don't know, Mark, are you connecting with them at all? Because there was just a whole team of people that were trained and certified through a Frog Watch program that was run by someone from out of the aquarium. Are you?
Yeah, that's a
connected
great
with
program.
them?
Actually, the woman who is my partner at Montgomery Parks, Rachel Galza, used to run Frog Watch. So was originally doing that, and so she's now leading the vernal pool program in Montgomery Parks, and really trying to develop sort of the state-of-the-art vernal pool assessment methods. But you're right, Frog Watch would be an important part of that, because it's one of the easier and more fun ways to go about doing this.
Yes. Well, it sounds like what we need to start doing is just partnering, knowing about each other, and making sure that we're all doing this connected together and using the same science, which was, and I'm not sure if you were on at the very beginning, but one of the things that Phyllis mentioned was, or maybe it was at the end, is we want to start doing some metrics on our parks. And so having that help of, those metrics that are already established and knowing what they are, then is very key. The other part is that we do a lot of landscape design on for I think pollinator habitat for habitat. I don't know how much we actually go after design for amphibians, for more of the herpetology habitat. So that might be something that if somebody wanted to lead us, along in that direction or keep in dialogue here that we could think about, because some of our parks are pretty large and it could be that the habitat needs some restoration that we might not even have, thought of the expertise on that one. So just another point to bring up.
Yeah, that's a good point. In my professional life, which is separate, we're developing Herp monitoring methods for restoration sites for Fairfax County, because they are building now stream restorations with wetlands and vernal pools associated with them, and they want to understand what they're actually doing. Everyone tells them it's a good idea, but they really don't know what's going on. So that gets us into that area of, what's a good site or what's a bad site, and how you can make them better. So yeah, so this is all.
If you need something that's closer to drive to, we've got a lot of sites around here that might be something I assume you're in Baltimore, maybe you're not, maybe you're.
I'm in Columbia, Maryland, but yeah, just the area between DC and Baltimore is pretty much my bailiwick. Yeah.
I'm gonna move over to Jeff, who's got his hand up, and then we'll come to Phyllis, who's also got her hand up.
Thank you. One of the questions that I was going to ask, I'm not familiar, and Kathy, you just addressed it in part, but you can have a wonderful vernal pool, and if it's surrounded by roads and there aren't amphibians there, they're not going to just suddenly appear. Maybe the odd osprey will drop one or something like that, but you're really not going to be able to get much of a population. Sort of the how do you restore something that's not there kind of dilemma. I don't know how you're doing your GIS or who's doing it, but I did a quick look. If I may, I will share my screen for just a moment. As soon as I can, yeah.
I think I might have to give you, oh, there we go.
Up there. This was just a quick look for amphibians in Baltimore County on iNaturalist. And I'm afraid I don't know Baltimore County well enough to match the dots to where your properties are, but this at least gives some sense of current, well, it's of course biased by the fact that the people who are reporting these are motivated enough to go and report them and probably live in areas where they might find them, or, obviously it's a biased example. But,
I'm sorry, but I'm seeing a diver. Is that the screen you meant to share? Or is there a different? Or am I the
Thank you, Phyllis. I was wondering about that too.
I really wanted this map that you're telling us about.
There, okay.
The map is in our hearts.
Yay, much better. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank you. I've got two screens and I was sharing the wrong screen, so thank you. So,
this is an iNaturalist map? Oh, cool.
Yes, this is from iNaturalist. Yeah. All I did is I typed in Baltimore County and then I filtered for amphibian. So that's what appeared there. I guess another secondary concern might be how to make information that there's a thriving vernal pool someplace. Does that then mean everyone goes and takes the tadpoles as home as pets? Does it cause other people to come and tromp through it and inadvertently kill them? What's the source of water that's going to keep the vernal pool wet long enough to actually have tadpoles and hatch successfully in small urban spaces, or relatively small compared to.
Yeah, I can speak to some of those questions, Jeff. So we do your GIS question first. We do, so one of the indicators is habitat that's listed somehow as habitat of an imperiled species. So I do not think right now, I would actually have to check, but I do not think right now that includes all amphibians. I think it's only those that have been listed as endangered. So I don't have that specific a data as what you're referring to, I don't think, but that is something I could ask. As far as creating habitat or trying to restore habitat for animals that are not there, I think that's why we decided to focus on those sites where I expected amphibians to be present. We didn't find as many, or not necessarily the species that we had expected, but so these are somewhat larger sites. Sawmill is 14 acres, is adjacent to Patapsco State Park, so there's connectivity there. There's a stream that runs through, there's a marshy area. The other one in Middle River, which I think is on the calendar for a few weeks from now, that's also 14 acres connected to I forget the name of the creek now, but there's connectivity there as well. So that's a larger habitat. And then Tollgate Wyndham is only 7, but there's school grounds and, stream buffers. So yeah, I hear it. And then to your point about, do you want to advertise that you've found what you found? I think that's where the education comes in. So when you do that, when you invite people into that space to share with them what you found, that needs to be part of, not just like, oh, look, this is so cool, go turn over all the logs. No, like this is how you respectfully and mindfully can look for these critters. If you do, you only take, only take pictures, leave only footprints. So that's part of that education that we need to provide. The other reason, like Tollgate Wyndham, that I was interested in that site is because that's our worst site as far as pollution goes. There's a lot of litter there, a lot of litter. There's a lot of human traffic. And so that in and of itself, I think there's value in knowing that there is nothing to be found. Because then you can also educate people like, hey guys, at this other site, here's what's living. There's a lack of that here, and why is that? And why is it important that you keep it clean? But I think that educational piece is very, very important.
Yeah, I figured I was asking fairly typical questions or things that you had thought about. That's why I was curious as to what the responses were. A suggestion in the presentation, again, not being all that familiar with Baltimore County, the example of the little street section that you were showing us, the triangle, was the main point. It doesn't look terribly large. I mean, it's maybe a few house lengths, and that kind of biased my understanding of what kinds of properties you had. So maybe another slide that showed larger areas, something like that would be a good thing as a presentation to avoid some of the way I was.
Well, but your bias is pretty accurate, Jeff. That is these 4 or 5 sites that I sent over to Matthew. Those are our bigger forested tracts. Those are 3 of those are riparian forest buffers, and that's it. Yeah. The other 16, 17 look more like this one in that picture. So I will, full disclosure, I did not put together a separate presentation just for Herp Club, but I also don't want to sugarcoat things. That is kind of what these sites look like. And yeah, what I try to create vernal pool amphibian habitat at that site? No, because if they, hop 5 yards in one direction, they'll get hit by a car. So, we pick those sites where we think there's maybe a chance for them to be good habitat.
Okay. Oh, and do I get extra credit for the marble salamanders in the background?
I'm
That's
very
wonderful picture, Jeff.
Yeah, that and the diver. I mean, between that and the scuba diver. You get the prize for the best background.
Oh yeah.
Is anybody hearing my peepers?
No.
No? Okay.
There were 600 that day. It was a Jug Bay Wetland Sanctuary, Pitfall Traps, quite a few years ago. And they caught 600 in one night.
Yep, Jug Bay is a great place.
So anyway. But I like the project. I like the idea. And I'm also in Howard County, so probably Catonsville is much more realistic than Dundalk or any of the other things that are much further. But
yeah, so we have one in Catonsville and one in Owings Mills. Those would probably be closest for you.
It looks like of the ones coming up, there's Volt's Neighborhood Park in Middle River, and then Norman Creek in Essex. Added to the 2 that we went to last weekend makes 4. I think you said 5. What was the 5th one, Phyllis?
I need to think about that. These are just sitting in my mind, but those are the top 4. There was a 5th that I recently thought of. Let me think about that, Matthew.
It may come to you. I see Diana has a hand up.
Hi, I'm the environmental program manager for Patapsco Heritage Greenway. So hi, Phyllis. It's good to see you again. First off,
Hey, Diane, I thought it was you. Yes, you.
So to also answer Jeff's question, when it comes to leading vernal pool hikes, so I'm one of the people who leads guided hikes about vernal pools and what they do. And my master's project is all about wetlands because I think they're just too legit to quit. You need all of them for that life. Is also making sure when we talk about it, we also talk about the safety of vernal pools. So also talk about like why when we ask people, when we're asking them to gather this data, we're never asking them to step into the vernal pool ever at any time. We're talking about how we need to be very careful about the boots that you wear, the stuff that's coming on them. We talk about salt watch and road salt issues. It's a wide variety of topics. Our main goal for PhD is just to make people know what vernal pools are in general. Like, why do they exist? Why does suddenly somewhere in your neighborhood get wet from only February to April? And you hear a lot of cool things, and that happens every year, and you've lived in that neighborhood for 20 years and you don't know why, but that's what that is. The other fun part that comes along with that is knowing how to collect the data. So to answer also Kathy's question, when it comes to like frog watch and things like that, there's lots of apps that are very focused on animals and plants, but nothing that takes the ecological holistic view of a vernal pool. The closest one you can get to is actually Freshwater Watch, which is based out of the UK. And you have to be a certified water quality monitor out of the UK to be a part of their app. So I've been on the diligent search with Rachel Galza to basically, do we need to create our own app? Do we need to create something where people can be a part of community science program? And that's definitely a term that PhD we have moved towards instead of citizen science, just because we've gotten a lot of kids that have said like, hey, I don't know if I can be a part of this. You know, my parents, there's issues. I don't know. And we go, no, you can come be with us, come do the thing. So doing community science projects, and then also partnering with organizations like Howard County Conservancy, where they built their own vernal pool, and getting data from that vernal pool to be able to see like, well, what does it look like if you build your own versus you have something in your backyard versus where you live? Because we work with a lot of different populations, from the Lansdowne Arbutus area to Owings Mills and Reisterstown, where I live, you know, to Ellicott City out more towards Clarksville. So there's a large variety of that. But the biggest thing that I was interested in for this meeting is definitely it's figuring out what groups match how you get vernal pools. Some people come because they're herp people. They want to see the frogs. They want to do that part of it. Same with like, how do you gather people for invasive species removal? A lot of times it's your gardens people. It's your people that really just like plants and they like moving that stuff. So I'm also interested in seeing like how to recruit more people to gain that knowledge. A lot of our groups have been more water quality. They've been really interested in their water quality that's around their neighborhood. So finding an area where they don't know anything about water quality for this small portion has been really interested in them. So that's why I was a part of it. But just so you guys know, that's why we're in the infancy of it for that part of the program.
Well, Diana, if I knew you would have been on here, I didn't have to be here. So you could.
No,
But
it's
thank
good
you for
to have-
joining us.
good to have
It shows
everybody.
that these guys did a good job of advertising if they got both of us to join this call.
So here's something I want to loop us back to is Phyllis started with the fact that we're a land trust. We're around conserving, it says land, but it also means habitat. And this matches then with what you mentioned, Mark, of, you know, identifying these special habitats in this bill that's pending, and then also being able to protect it. In the meantime, a lot of this property, a lot of these ponds, and a lot of this habitat is in private hands. And so the question is, if those places are identified and some funding source can be identified, we are the land trust in that URDL area of which can help with that kind of conservation easement. And it doesn't mean we can do them all, but it does give you an idea of thinking about if there's a special vernal pond you keep going to, and you know that, you know, Mrs. Smith is getting up there in years and hasn't decided to put it aside, but might be willing to do the IRS write-off. Anyway, that's the type of stuff that a land trust does very well. And so anyway, that's one of the things that we can offer, not to everybody, but you could also help us get money for it too. The purchase price.
That's a great point, Kathy. I mean, getting people to know what they are and care about them, finding out where they are, and then preserving them ultimately is and land trusts are critical for any kind of conservation. And so getting them into the vernal pool space is a great idea.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I hope everyone can continue to think about this and you'll make these connections that we've just started to establish here. It is after 8, so I think we want to wrap it up here. But hopefully some of you will join us at next month's meeting. We'll be back in person at the museum at 6908 Blair Road, second Wednesday of every month. You can also check out our website and see the calendar of events. Maybe you might be interested in World Turtle Day, which is coming up in May, and so on. I really appreciate all of your time, and feel free to keep in touch with me through email, and I can connect you with Kathy and Phyllis and everyone else, and Mark and Diana and everyone else who is here. We can all keep this conversation going. And definitely, we all agree that this is important work, and this is just sort of like a first step towards a longer term project. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care of yourselves. See you soon.
Thanks for hosting. Thank you.